Well, hello. This is Jim Hochberg with the FFF podcast. I'll be here with Eva. You know, we're going to take a look today at the United States Supreme Court recent opinion that the press would tell you the Supreme Court decided the federal government, Department of Homeland Security, border guys can cut the razor wire in Texas. But it's a little more complicated, and I want us to be smart. So we're going to look at that. Let's talk about it. Miss Andrade, how are you?
I'm doing good. You know, this story that we're going to talk about today, it's really interesting because if you look at it through the eyes of a humanitarian, right, you're like, oh, these people lost their lives, right?
Which people?
So according to the story, right, and this comes from SCOTUS blog, right, when they're talking about this particular case. And they talked about 3 migrants, a woman and 2 children who drowned on January 12th near the disputed area. And the Biden administration, they were saying that why this case was so important was because it infringed on their right to go and save these people because that barbed wire was there. Sort
of.
Right. So I know that you're going to dig a little deeper, but that's the story. People are like, well, this is a humanitarian thing. We've got to be able to save people. And if we can't get to them because there's barbed wire in the, yeah. So anyway, so let's give you the mic now because I know that there's more to the story than what we're hearing.
So we're going to start at the end because that's what made the news. This case has been going on since 2023, I think April-ish.
When did the barbed wire actually go up? Like when did they start putting it up?
Well, and it's so let me start with what the Supreme Court said, and we'll work our way backwards because we do need to unpack the history before it got to the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court on January 22nd, 2024, issued its order, it's like 2 sentences. Okay? It's 2 sentences. And that's because it was not an appeal of a finished case that had all of the reasoning and all that stuff.
Was this the 5-4 decision?
This was a 5-4 decision, but it was, and we've talked about it many, many times. When I file a lawsuit and I may ask for some emergency ruling at the very beginning because the case needs it. And if it's denied, I can appeal that because it's an emergency that's needed. And that's what came to the Supreme Court. It's not that the whole case was over. Okay, that's the thing. So what did the Supreme Court say? This was Justices John Roberts, Thomas, Alito, Sotomayor, Kagan, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Jackson. That's the 9 Supreme Court justices. So the opinion is this, quote, the application to vacate the injunction presented to Justice Alito and by him referred to the court is granted. What does that mean? That means that either Texas or the federal government asked the court to strike down an injunction stopping the government from cutting the razor wire at the beginning of the case, the emergency request. And then the second sentence of the ruling says, the December 19th, 2023 order of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit is vacated. That Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals order is where the injunction was given as an emergency basis. And then, just so that we know, Justice Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh would have denied the application to vacate the injunction, which means the 4 ladies and John Roberts voted to vacate the injunction. So, okay, so that's what the Supreme Court said, that little teeny paragraph. I was listening to Charlie Kirk. I like listening to Charlie Kirk, but he was acting like a liberal over this. That the result of the opinion was more important than the structural soundness of our constitutional government.
Well, I was trying because, you look at this because you have lots of years of experience as an attorney, right? And plus you've argued case. In fact, you had one that went up to the Supreme Court, didn't you?
We asked them to take it and they almost did, but they didn't.
Yeah, okay. But that's how close you got. So, this, you live and breathe this stuff. But I was trying to just think of this the way normal people are thinking.
That's what I want to do.
Right. So we have a state that, if you just look at the surface of this, so I don't care whether someone listening is a Democrat or Republican, let's just look at what's happening. You've got a lot of people coming into the state of Texas, right?
Over the border, illegally, without being checked or anything.
And so whether you are a Democrat or Republican, if you're working on the border, you are
or living
on the border, you're dealing with the ramifications of this, right? And so they were inundated, and one of the ways that the state of Texas wanted to solve this problem was to put some barbed wire so that people couldn't sneak in because they were dealing with this inundation of, right?
So we have to also go back to when Trump was president and when Obama was president before that. Because remember, there were cases at the Supreme Court asking the court whether under the Constitution, does the federal government have exclusive jurisdiction over our border, or can border states also act? And what the Supreme Court said was, under the Constitution, the federal government has the exclusive authority to deal with our neighboring nations, because that's basically what it says. If the federal government has that authority and they are refusing to follow the law,
does the state then have the right?
Now, can the state do it on its own? That's what this case was about.
Right. But Texas, regardless of getting into the semantics of the law, they had a problem they had to deal with. And so putting up the barbed wire for them was a way to deal with this problem.
So let's flush it out with some of the actual facts out of the court opinions.
Okay.
And it will be the facts that the judge that wrote the opinion picked as pertinent to the decision making. But so on October 30th, your birthday or Mary Ann's?
That's Mary Ann's.
On October 30th, 2023, the United States District Court for the Western District of Texas, Del Rio Division. That ring a bell? Del Rio? Yeah. That's where that's where it is. Okay. So they issued an order. And here's it's very little I'm going to share, but it's really important. So the order starts, pending before this court is the state of Texas's, that's the plaintiff, emergency motion for a temporary restraining order or stay of agency action, that's called the motion, against the United States Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas in his official capacity, Customs and Border Patrol, blah, 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 blah. Then they say, as explained below, the court, October 30th, 2023, grants the motion for a temporary restraining order until the parties have an opportunity to present evidence at a preliminary injunction hearing before the court. That's what got started in April. It came to a hearing, the order October 30th. So to give a little bit of background, on October 24th, the plaintiff, Texas, 2023, commenced this civil action against the defendants when it filed a complaint. According to the plaintiff, the lawsuit was filed because federal officials are allegedly destroying the plaintiff's property by cutting plaintiff's concertina wire located near the U.S.-Mexican border. So they were cutting it before. The case got started in October, but the facts were back in April.
But again, the reason they put up the barbed wire to begin with because there was a problem.
We're going to hear what the judge says. So he says the plaintiff believes this property destruction is intended to allow migrants to enter the country. So Texas sues because of the value of its razor wire that's being destroyed, not because of immigration or borders. It's like a car crash. You broke my car, you got to pay me. So that's kind of smart, okay? That's kind of smart. So then the district court judge, October 30th, goes on to say the plaintiff, Texas, establishes that the wire barrier is on private property with the permission of the owners and or the local government authority. So then they say, what's the standard for us to review this? A court may issue a temporary restraining order without telling the other side, which is very unusual. Usually, I always tell the state office that I'm suing when I want an injunction because I think it's fair for them to show up and defend themselves. But you can do it without telling them, which is kind of interesting. But only if specific facts in an affidavit or a verified complaint clearly show that immediate or irreparable injury, loss, or damage will result to the move-on, the plaintiff, Texas, before the adverse party can be heard in opposition, and that the move-on's attorney certifies in writing any efforts made to give notice and the reasons why it shouldn't be required. So this standard seems to me to be more than the value of the razor wire being destroyed, which Texas purchased and put up. That doesn't sound like irreparable injury, loss, or damage, because if at the end of the case the U.S. government loses, they can buy new razor wire and give it back. So the case was started claiming it was damage to my razor wire, and I don't think damaging razor wire is irreparable harm. You can fix it by the payment of money. Okay, so then the court goes on to say, conclusion. See, this was fast. I skipped a bunch of pages. If you want to read this, we can put the site to it on the YouTube thing. Accordingly, it's ordered that the plaintiff's emergency motion for a temporary restraining order or stay of agency action is granted on October 30th at 9:30 a.m. The temporary restraining order shall last until it expires on November 13th, 2023 at 9:30 a.m. unless a further order of this court extends the time.
So they could have. Right?
So what the court said was, I'm going to grant it right now, and you don't have to tell the government about it, but it's going to end in 2 weeks. So, and then the court ends and says, we're going to have a preliminary injunction hearing for November 7th at 2 p.m. So before the 13th of November, when it ended, they're having an evidentiary hearing where you have to have testimony and all that stuff. But remember, the issue was our personal property razor wires being cut by the federal government because the government wants to let in immigrants. Texas didn't say we're trying to protect our border. They're trying to protect the value of their razor wire.
And you think this was a good argument?
Well, it was kind of clever, but it lost in the end at this point. So let's look at the November 29th, 2023, same court, District Court for the Western District, Del Rio Division, after the preliminary injunction hearing. So what happened? So the court says the defendant, that's the federal government, justifications. The defendants offer two justifications for the series of decisions to cut or remove the plaintiff's fence. Because this is a case about a fence. We got to remember that, okay? When you read the article on SCOTUS blog, it's all about immigration.
Right.
That's not what the case is about. But that's why I want to have this show. Yes. Our people got to be smart.
So why would SCOTUS then go that route if the case is really about wire?
I'm going to get you there.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the two reasons that the federal government told the court at the preliminary injunction hearing after they were given notice why they made the decisions to cut or move the fence. Number one, to discharge their statutory obligation to inspect, apprehend, and detain individuals unlawfully entering the United States. Now, I could see A.G. Paxton in Texas really rolling his eyes at this one, because the whole reason he put the fence up is they were not, in fact, inspecting, apprehending, and detaining individuals unlawfully entering.
Right.
But that's not part of the case. The case is about the fence.
Well, if we're going on fact, then wouldn't it have been more accurate then, if we believe the SCOTUS blog, to say we couldn't get to people to help them? Well, that would have been a little bit more close to what they're saying.
The second reason was that to prevent or address medical emergencies. Okay. So we're cutting down so we can go inspect people, but we're really not going to do it because we don't want to.
And just in case somebody gets hurt.
Or medical emergencies responses, right?
Okay. And I mean, these look like reasonable things to say, right?
Well, that's why I don't like our people hearing something on Charlie Kirk's show and being misled. Because he's really a smart guy, but on this one, he's totally being a liberal, saying the court should do immigration. This case was about the value of a fence. That's the problem. He didn't read the stuff. He was using the story. Okay, so the court says the plaintiff, that's Texas, allegations of a policy, practice, or pattern by the federal government. So what the Texas says that the defendants, which is the federal government, acts in interfering with the wire fence. It represents a, quote, policy, practice of or pattern of seizing, damaging, and destroying Texas personal property, the fence, by cutting, severing, tearing its concertina wire fence to introduce breaches, gaps, and holes. Texas alleges that the federal government have authorized their officials or agents to engage in this conduct anytime an alien has managed to illegally cross the international border in the Rio Grande River to process that alien into the United States, even where migrants are in no apparent distress or when there is legitimate emergencies. Even if there's, so they're saying it's not because of emergencies, because you're doing it even when there's not emergencies.
Well, and then there's the unforeseen. Well, and it's not unforeseen. The consequences of cutting the fence means that there is a way for people to get in.
So the court goes on to look at whether or not, under the Constitution of the United States of America, which makes the federal government in charge of our borders with our neighboring countries through immigration, through treaties, through whatever, does the action by the federal government violating the statute that says they're supposed to apprehend, detain, deport, if they're violating that by cutting the fence and letting them in, is that a violation of the law? And the court said no. So, but because they were cutting the fence and they were letting people in, the conclusion that the judge made on the preliminary injunction is denied. Very interesting. The same judge that granted the temporary restraining order says it's ordered that the plaintiff's motion for a preliminary injunction and an order to stay the agency action is denied. So the case is about a fence. It's not about immigration. So that got appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals before it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. That was December 19th. So this is October 30th, November 29th, and now on December 19th, 3 short weeks later, the Fifth Circuit is hearing this because it is an appeal of this emergency problem. If this isn't a case that's been on for 10 years like the one I had, that I finally got to the Supreme Court at the end of the case. And people need to realize that. It's not about immigration. So what does the Fifth Circuit say? The Fifth Circuit says that injunctive relief was appropriate to stop the cutting of the wire because Texas's claim sought to stop a continuing trespass to its land, and the agency did, in fact, exceed its authority by cutting the wire for purposes other than a medical emergency.
Well, yeah, and you said, again, without any legal background, when you were reading that original stuff, you said that the wire was on private property.
Correct. But private property goes up to the border in some cases.
Right. But I mean, but if it's private property and somebody allows Texas government to put this barbed wire on my private property, the government can come in on my private property and cut the fence.
Well, that's what they're saying. But that's not what the Fifth Circuit says. The Fifth Circuit says we will order the federal government to stop cutting the fence, that the agency exceeded its authority by cutting the wire for purposes other than a medical emergency, the inspection or detention, and the public interest supported by protecting property rights from government intrusion. So the Fifth Circuit said, look, you're not really doing medical emergencies and you're not really detaining, so you are violating the rules you're supposed to be working under federal government, and you're intruding on private property rights in Texas. And Texas is not the place you want to intrude on
private property in Texas.
So then the appellate court considers 4 factors in deciding whether to grant a stay pending appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Whether the state has made a strong showing that it's likely to win on the merits at the end of the case, whether the state, and this is Texas, whether Texas will be irreparably injured without a stay, if the federal government is allowed while the case is going on to keep cutting the fence, will they be irreparably injured? And whether issuance of a stay will substantially injure the federal government interest in the proceeding. And fourth, where the public interest lies. Where the United States is the opposing party, the third and fourth requirements merge together. So that would be whether there's a substantial injury and whether the public interest, okay? So the Fifth Circuit publishes their order. Texas seeks an injunction pending appeal. So they knew the appeal of the district court's denial of the preliminary injunction was being appealed. They wanted to have the federal government not be allowed to continue to cut the fence. Texas has constructed along more than 29 miles of municipal and private land in the Eagle Pass sector of southern border, this concerta wire fence. The district court granted Texas a temporary restraining order, after which it held hearings, heard testimony from multiple witnesses, received copious documentary evidence. Despite making numerous fact findings supporting Texas's claim, the district court ruled that the United States sovereign immunity had not been waived and that the court was therefore barred from converting the TRO into a preliminary injunction. Texas immediately appealed and sought an emergency injunction pending appeal. The panel at the Fifth Circuit granted the temporary administrative stay while they had their hearing, concluding that the district court legally erred, made a mistake with respect to the sovereign immunity claim, and that Texas has otherwise satisfied the factors under these cases. The Fifth Circuit grants Texas's request for an injunction pending appeal. This is all at the very beginning of the case. That's what's important for our listeners to know. Accordingly, the federal government is ordered to stop during this appeal from damaging, destroying, or otherwise interfering with Texas's wire fence in the vicinity of Eagle Pass, as indicated in the complaint. As the parties have agreed, so now there's an agreement between the federal government and Texas, the defendants are permitted to cut or move the wire if necessary to address any medical emergency specified in the TRO.
Which was supposedly what it was all about to begin. Yeah. Right.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
The Supreme Court of the United States gets this Fifth Circuit appeal and they
issues a 2-sentence response.
And they say, at this point in the case, we're not going to stay on appeal. They're not talking about anything but damaged fence. And that's what people need to realize. Don't be mad at Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts because the result of their decision is immigrants get to come in illegally where the federal government cuts the wire. That wasn't what the case was about. It was about damage to fencing owned by Texas on private property.
So that means that according to where it stands right now, the federal government can continue to cut the wire.
Well, it's interesting. What happened to the stipulation that they entered into that they would only do it to do medical emergencies? Right. That is still in place, I think.
Okay.
Because that wasn't ordered by the court. That was voluntarily agreed to in a stipulation is a contract.
So right now, though,
they
can go cut wire anywhere they want.
We need to have Jason Jones in Texas go look at the border and tell us what's going on and call in with a report. But I think the stipulation that the federal government would only cut the wire in a medical emergency is probably the status quo. But it's not
But they
clear.
were doing that before anyway.
No, they were just doing it because they didn't like it.
Right. So in other words, this is going to continue.
So it's an interesting case. And it's the reason I wanted us to waste a show talking about it is so that we have smart viewers and listeners that can actually intelligently understand more than what they might hear from Charlie Kirk in my case or somebody else on the radio or TV.
I didn't hear the Charlie Kirk show that you're talking about, but my gut instinct is that as Christians, of course, we care about the humanity of people, right? We don't want to see people hurt. We don't want to see people losing their lives.
But on the other hand,
I was going to do that on the other hand.
People that want to pay money to a vendor on a bridge to jump off with a bungee cord, and they die, hey, if you want to swim across the Rio Grande with 2 kids and you die, hey, it's like a bungee cord jump.
Well, I think that anybody who, if you put yourselves into the landowner's position in Texas, if you owned land that was near the border, And I have heard some of these stories. They're horrifying. I mean, people saying that they've got to sleep with guns because people are getting into their yards, and some of the situations.
It's scary.
It's so. I mean, but if we put ourselves into their shoes, these are people that have worked long and hard to own their property, right? Obviously, if as a homeowner you want to take care of your property, so if you say to the government, you know what, I'm having this problem with people coming in my backyard, so yes, please put this barbed wire there because I want to keep my own family safe, right? And
of course, Texas has a different perspective. They don't want to keep incurring the financial obligation of taking care of all these illegal immigrants, which is why the governor's shipping them to other states and cities. So the landowners near the border want to be protected by the razor wire. The governor and the attorney general want to put the razor wire up to save the money that they have to spend.
And the influx, right. I mean, and it's interesting because now that they're busing people to different states, other states who would not normally have been dealing with this are now having to deal with it because I do have a heart for people, and you know that I do. And so I'm not going to say that all the people coming into the United States are all crooks and have done bad things.
Well, the problem is we have no idea.
We have no idea. But we do know that there are some people trying to come to America because this is the greatest country.
So let me just put some math in there. How many states we got?
We have a lot of states.
We have 50.
Yes, I know. 50
so that means we have how many state capitals?
50.
Okay. So if a crew of 5 people that we're going to blow up every state capital at the same time on the same day, how many people need to do that? 5 times 50.
Right. Okay.
250 people.
I am not a mathematician, people. So I'm not going to say something dumb.
Out of the 10 million that have illegally come in that we don't know who they are, you only need 250 of them to be bad guys that want to work on a 5-man crew to blow up a state capitol. It's such a small number of bad actors. It's crazy.
Well, we
need to control the border.
Well, yeah, we could have 2 horrible people that come in and just kill 5 people that are still
correct
loss of life. So correct. I mean, so I hear what you're saying. It's like I try very hard when the issue of immigration comes up that I don't try to jump on either side because everyone understands that our immigration problem. We were having problems with our immigration system a long time ago. There are people that I've met recently that came to the United States years ago the right way and are still waiting to get whatever card or whatever. And they're looking at this. I asked, okay, so when my mom was in the hospital recently, one of the nurses is actually in this process. And he was explaining how angry he gets when he hears that people are being pushed up to the front of the line when he's been here working and doing all the right things. And so we have to acknowledge that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. We absolutely. So what's our call to action if there's any?
So hopefully we'll be able to give access to these opinions because they are online and people can read them and talk about them. That's what we got to do. We got to be educated.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we appreciate you spending the last half an hour with us today, and we're hoping to see you next week. But in the meantime, like this video, share it, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification button so you know every time we upload a new video. And we will see all of you next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.